So welcome to our panel. As I said, I'm Kate, and I'm a fellow, and I work for Beth Novak at the new Burn Center for Social Change at Northeastern University. And I lead Innovate US, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but it's a nonpartisan nonprofit really committed to offering free access to high quality training and coaching in digital innovation and public problem solving skills to public sector workers. Right now, we're really focused on states, and you'll see more as to why. But I want to just share a little bit more about this model, how we got started, and a little bit of what we learned. And then we're going to kick it to the panel, and we're going to dive into some of the topics from there and really get a chance to hear about the exciting work of the folks who are joining us. So with that, for folks who have been part of the Code for America sessions over the last 2 days, whether virtually or in person, I'm sure you've heard so many different amazing things that are happening to improve service delivery. And for us, we're here today and really think a lot about this question. How can we equip existing public workers with the skills needed to improve service delivery? So we think a lot about how we can really support workers at scale in getting access to some of these skills that we know are really critical to support effective and better and improved service delivery to the residents that we serve. And we'll talk a little bit more about what these skills are, but really we think about it in terms of helping people get skills to better solve public problems. And I just tossed this up here because we know that the OECD and Bloomberg Philanthropies has perspectives, but we see a lot of kind of consistencies. And for us, we think about how we can support people in things like how to really define a problem, how to use human-centered design to do that, how to use data and analytical thinking, using things like collective intelligence to better understand the communities that we're serving and how they're approaching a problem or experiencing a program or experiencing a point in their life. And we also think a little bit about helping people understand how they can kind of get smart quickly and see what's working elsewhere that they can integrate into their work. And so we have, over the last few months, started to kind of think about what this training and content looks like at the state level. So go back to the last slide. Beth Novak, who I mentioned, runs this Burn Center at Northeastern, is also the Chief Innovation Officer for the state of New Jersey and had piloted some content of public problem solving curriculum and had seen a lot of interest and excitement in New Jersey for people signing up to take some of these classes and skills, and kind of thought maybe there's an opportunity to do this across states, that states could work together to create and disseminate some of this content in a way that would have added benefits kind of across the network. But we know that one state can't use taxpayer dollars to pay to upskill workers in another state. So we thought that a new model might be needed, but we wanted to learn a little bit more. So we see pockets of innovation training in some states today, and please make sure you read the yellow sticker that says just to name a few. There are a bunch out there. And when we talk to people across states, and I'll go through that next, we heard a lot that there were different innovation trainings that had kind of been stood up and really piloted or created by innovative leaders who wanted to train a specific cohort of people on a specific topic. Things like lean or a specific management training or training data analysts in a certain skill. But we didn't see a lot of content that was easily accessible and high quality for folks to kind of gain a variety of skills and understanding of concepts that I think many of us think of are really important for people to understand and start to implement as they are delivering services. And so we talked to folks. So these are, again, just to name a few, but we took time to really focus at the state level, and we talked to folks who were in California, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Colorado at the beginning, and talked to chief learning officers, folks who led innovation teams, people who ran government operations shops, and we wanted to learn a couple of things from them. We wanted to really learn what their training landscape looked like, and what innovation training existed or content professional development at the state level, and how workers got access to it, and had a ton of great conversations with lovely people, some that you probably will see here today, and learned a couple of things that made us feel like maybe we should start something to kind of advance this work. So feel free to +1 in the chat, because I'm sure none of this is new. But I wanted to share because I think it's important to highlight how it seemed consistent across some states. So heard a lot that states lack capacity to really create and make a high quality innovation and skills training available. Someone said to me, I'm one person and I'm responsible for training 14,000 people, and my office currently doesn't have a budget. But folks had a real will that they really wanted to supply this content, but didn't really have the time to focus on it, which is totally reasonable. They talked to us about kind of these different trainings that had been sprung up maybe on different teams, but weren't necessarily integrated or weren't necessarily built for scale. And a real deep belief across everyone we talked to, how skill building really does lead to better outcomes. And then when people have access to the skill and understanding and can start to implement it, that it does lead to better outcomes. And the last few things, just folks really valued the collaboration. They thought that while states differed, that there was value to kind of a shared innovation skills curriculum. And the second piece was that people were excited that a multi-state effort could unlock certain incentives that one state couldn't necessarily unlock on their own. Things like supporting leaders in adopting training like this because other states were doing it. And then also a big opportunity in terms of being able to connect people who are working on similar programs, not necessarily at the top levels of government, but folks who may work on similar programs in specific agencies who rarely get the chance to engage with others or share best practices. And then a big urgency to get started. So I want to just go through, and I'm going to just rattle this off, but feel free to read. It's a bit brass tactics, but I want to just highlight the model so that if there's another kind of topic area that you think might be served by a similar model, that you can see how we did it, and we can continue to collaborate and share. But I just wanted to share how we did it. So in August, we raised some philanthropic funds to start this new entity. We pulled together this group of learning and innovation leaders, started off with 3 states. We added Pennsylvania, and now we've also been lucky enough to add Rhode Island and Maine. We wanted to get started, so not letting perfect be the enemy of good. We kind of launched these free workshops each week designed to support people in gaining access to understanding and kind of starting to think about how they would implement some of these skills. We pulled in people who had experience using that skill in government, so that they could really talk to their experience of how they got something done or how they used a new skill set. And folks got a personalized certificate for completing it, and some states allowed them to apply that to their learning requirements. Fourth, we really just tried to keep it easy for our state partners because they're so busy that we wanted to just share content with them that they could share with training leads, with different departments and agencies. And we really did the rest. So tried to take everything else off of their plate in terms of the content creation, making sure it was high quality, all of the reminders, all of that stuff, and meant monthly to gain feedback and just kind of open collaboration. And luckily for me, I get to chat with so many of our partners on an ongoing basis as well. So this is really kind of how we got started. And it really just started last year. So again, very new. I wanted to highlight a couple things that we've learned and seen that's kind of going to take us forward in terms of how we're thinking about going from where we are to future steps. So 3 things. I went through like hundreds of submissions and just wanted to highlight kind of 3 things that are what people really sign up because they want to learn. So 1, they have like a specific project or problem area, and they sign up for a couple of different workshops so that they can think about how they might use that to help whatever they're building be successful. The second is that they are someone who wants to improve their team's work more generally, new ways to change programs and processes, and they really want all of their submissions are focused on like getting things done and being more efficient. And then the last thing is that we have a lot of people who are just excited to join a session and learn something new and learn from someone who's done it before in government, and they just want to be a stronger employee in government and kind of stay current with their skills. You're welcome to read this. We've hosted now over 1,000 state workers, and while we really want to optimize on impact, not just the numbers that you see here, I did want to call out a couple of things that I thought were interesting in terms of what we see from feedback and the learners that we've had so far. We see that feedback isn't really differing based on the stage of career of the person who's being part of these sessions. And we see that people kind of tend to, initially we thought that maybe content needed to be hyper localized, to have examples only from a certain region in a certain state for it to be applicable. But what we've seen is that, on a topic like behavioral insights, if the examples and the content and the instructor is really engaging and can give examples that make sense to the learners, that people do really receive that well, even if it's not specific to their state. So we're excited about the opportunities that unlocks. And then the last thing I will share, which is new data that we've had just the last kind of 2 days, is that we launched a series over the summer. And we've seen that, and we've kind of created a bit of a curriculum, and we've seen that about 90% of people who have signed up for more than 75% of the sessions. So kind of signaling that they're interested in a little bit more of a curriculum approach and not just focusing on, one specific thing. They're really interested in getting access to a couple of different skills. So I'll pause with one of the many pieces of feedback that we've gotten, but I think something like this just makes us excited to continue this journey when we see people who are in rooms having light bulb moments in terms of thinking about a new skill, having time to take a break from what they're doing day to day, and rethink and reconsider kind of how they're approaching a current problem. So with that, I will pause and go back to the panel. Seeing so many people, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thanks. Can't wait to read the chat, which I'm sure was wonderful. And I want to go to you all. I want to hear from our wonderful panelists. And first, we're just going to do kind of quick introduction. So name, background, what's been keeping you busy on this topic. And if you have a song that that relates to public sector upskilling for you, feel free to mention it. So Alexis, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Like, what a rock star group we have joining. I love these because I love Code for America, because you just learn so much from each other. So my name is Alexis Bonnell. I'm a very proud recovering bureaucrat. I served most recently as the Chief Innovation Officer for the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is kind of like the U.S. government's development, charity, and philanthropic arm around the world. But right now, what I love and what keeps me busy is I came over to Google to, in essence, my fancy title is Emerging Technology Evangelist for Government. But what that really means is that I'm the person you call when someone says, like, what is AI really? Like, well, how does this actually work? Is this a $200 million problem, or does someone already solve this? And so I just really serve the public servants. And I think if I was going to pick a song, I would, in essence, say, maybe I really believe in curiosity. And so I guess my song would be, I take my chances and put myself out there.
Amazing. Thanks, Alexis. And I love your title. I think it's fantastic. Blake, I'm going to go from Alexis to you in California. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Happy to. Blake Valena. So previous to what I'm doing now, I worked in the Chief Data Office in San Francisco and helped grow Data Academy, which was staff-led training program that was free to city and county staff in San Francisco. I also did other things there, ran our data science service and a bunch of other scattering things. What my attention is focused at now, I have transitioned to a shocking another role in the Chief Data Office in the state of California, doing very similar work. The portfolio I work at, my official title is Statewide Data Programs Manager, is if you think of all the data teams scattered amongst the state, like what are the blockers to them really doing what they want to do and have the time to do and have the resources to do? And my job is to help pull away those blockers one by one with many other hands than just mine, because some of the blockers are quite sizable. But one key thing is we're looking at the state of sort of data training in the state and what can be done there and what's the missing gaps. Okay, the song off the top of my head, the first one came to mind. I wish I had more time to think of a better one. I Believe I Can Fly. I don't know why that popped into my head, but there's some like subconscious Freudian thing, and I think it's a very positive message, and I do feel very positive about this work.
You are flying. You are taking care of me. I love it. Thanks, Blake. And Shani.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shani Manavan. I am the director of the Office of Innovation. Well, they keep changing the titles. The Director of Innovation for California Health and Human Services Center for Data Insights and Innovation. So it's a lot of words. Basically, it's California Health and Human Services innovation stuff. I was previously at U.S. Digital Service at Homeland Security, and then I was previously at Consumer Financial, and then I was at Indian Affairs for better part of a decade. So I've been in federal, state, and soon the focus will be more municipal, which is exciting. But the point of my Office of Innovation, when it started, we didn't have a big budget. So instead of hiring people, I focused on teaching state staff to do human-centered design flavored things. And as a longtime federal employee, I was like, it's a skills gap. So if we can fill the skills gap, then we can get government looking more like the cool things that I'm seeing U.S. Digital Service do. And people loved it. They wanted the skills. They wanted to be able to be part of the cool kids. So the office was really a fun way to to let people play with these skills and concepts. A song, I would have to say, so many good ones. But I'm going to say the Black Keys, Shine a Little Light, because I feel like everything I'm doing is just shining a little bit of light on, here, try this, try that. So
it's great. and Shani, I'm so excited to have you on because you've been in so many rooms really like coaching and seeing how these skills are adopted and really like in the room where it happens, if you will. So I want to shift a little bit and just hear from you all about kind of the need. So someone said this, I've heard it a couple sessions at Code for America, like agreeing on the purpose of the bridge, if that makes sense, the bridge that we're building. And so often we talk about the need for public sector upskilling or people needing to get smarter in government. But we sometimes don't get granular enough to really say, like, okay, what are we actually talking about here? What does that actually mean? So Alexis, I want to hear from you. I know, you spend time in government, you've been at Google for public service. What skills do you think were essential here?
Yeah, I mean, what I love about what you showed earlier is that I had this really incredible luxury between the time that I, stopped my public service and started at Google really intentionally. And I actually interviewed like the 50 public servants, state, local, and other countries, federal, that really impressed me, right? Like probably like Blake and Shani here, like, the ones that had a vision, really got things done, right? Like a bias to action, but also, that we're able to bring folks along. And so I think, for me, what was really interesting is finding, even in that personal level, some really interesting factors. Like what I found that was common across all of them was they were highly curious, right? So curiosity is actually a skill. It isn't, there's some element of it that's part of your nature, but there's also part of it that you exercise, right? And you choose to exercise. So I saw public servants have things like curiosity calendars or other things where they really instituted a way to be open and permeable. Another one was relationship with risk, right? I think that was something that, many public servants who navigate this, maybe underestimate just how they have a slightly more comfortable understanding or perception of navigating risk and what risk is. And I think the other two that were really interesting was, really successful ones actually really looked for allies early on. And so what I mean by that is, they were bringing the procurement person, the legal person, all the roadblocks they might hit later, and they were bringing them into the intimate conversation early on, right? And they were understanding the boundaries. But the final one was storytelling. And I think when we think about skilling, when we think about training, we often don't take the time to inspire the why. Right? We'll tell someone, you need to do this, tick the box, blah, blah, blah. You're late in 90 days, you're going to lose access if you don't do this training, right? But people are people, right? And so really learning about how you can help them find that connection, the what's in it for me, why is this compelling, why does it matter to our mission, in a really authentic way, I found, was really critical. And transparently, for people who are looking, Google knows this, like I plan on returning to public service, but part of my curiosity calendar of coming here when I agreed was like, I actually wanted to learn 3 things. I wanted to learn, just quite honestly, I know this is recorded, but that's okay. Like I wanted to peek behind the curtain of technology and know like what was bullshit and what was real, right? Like when someone says something like, but what about privacy and what about security? Like I wanted to know what the answers like were, right? Like, so that was number 1. But the second, and I think it's really critical to skills, is I wanted to understand more about culture, right? Because when we're really asking someone to learn, we're asking them to change, we're asking them to evolve. And, I felt like it was really important to figure out like, what does a culture look like that does that in a healthy way? And, I think, not saying that Google's is the best, but like they had a reputation, right? And so there's been a lot to learn. And the final one, and one that I've already seen in the chat and from Janie's work and Blake's work and your work, Kate, I realized you can't do innovation without being in love with your customer, right? And I just think sometimes in government and even for myself, I miss the mark on that, right? Sometimes we have a monopoly or we're the ones people have to deal with. And so I really wanted to take a moment and step back and like figure out what does it look like to be in love with your customer, right? And I think whether it's UX or other folks, that are listening in, so for me, I think those are some of the things that represent the journey that I'm on, as a learner and skilling.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis. And I also want to hit on the piece on storytelling and how important that is. And I think some of the workshops that we've led, even just what I think previously some folks would find like a more basic skill of persuasive writing, how to really create an argument and share it and present it. Some of that was incredibly popular for some of those reasons that you were saying, really understanding your audience, how to communicate, and so important. Blake, I want to go to you. I know you've been, at the city level with SF Data Academy. I tossed it in the chat, and now with Cal Data. When you think about that gap or opportunity with upskilling at the state level, what are 2 or 3 skills that you feel like if they can be unlocked, really have the power to change how we operate?
Yeah, and one framing I want to make is that sort of any of the skills I'm about to talk to, like these exist in the state and in the city, right? We see them all the time and in different places, but it can be somewhat uneven, right? Both within the single person, they might not have if there's 12 or 15 or whatever the magic number that doesn't actually exist is. We often don't see everything. Sorry. And also, also outside of themselves, if the other members around them don't have it, there's sort of an unevenness that causes this sort of friction for them trying to do things, right? And so, to animate this with a story, we were just working with an analyst in a particular department, Cal Data, and this was a very self-motivated learner, right? So like the textbook had a problem, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find all the sort of free private trainings, right?
I think there may be some of those on this call, so go ahead.
Right, and this is awesome, right? And she was able to build out, happened to be using tool Power BI, a dashboard. And I was talking, and she's very excited, but also very frustrated. And, I was looking at, there was sort of like some conceptual things that was clearly missed that often isn't taught because a vendor's teaching the tool to be the sizzle reel, right? And she definitely got the sizzle reel, but there's going to be some longstanding problems. And then the most important one I felt was a deep frustration because audio issues. Management wasn't responding as much. They wanted to go back to the sort of Excel workbook that they've looked at for the past 20 years, right? And still wanted them to build that up. And so it really sort of surfaced that, when we thought about training at Data Academy and how we're thinking about it now, there's sort of yes, an aspect of modern data tools and approaches around it, right? So all the innovation of sort of what are the cloud-based tools? How do you do it? The sustainable agile practices, how do you bring those in, those concepts around it? But also weaving in to these same courses that are around sort of traditional tools or a dashboard, these core things around making sure you're applying it to the right problem and in a collaborative way. And so when I was chatting with her, I was talking about sort of, like, well, what would user-centered dashboard design look like? And giving some sort of like, how could you do a co-designing process and that type of skill set? And instantly responded and fiendishly started looking for courses to do that, right? And so it's like, these are the core things when unlocked will, I think, really accelerate, not just the sort of technical piece, which is of course very important, because oftentimes, we see people, at least at the data front, locked into sort of Excel is the sort of only tool that they know, right? But when we expand past that of understanding how the data is coming in, the concepts around structuring it, as well as the more human of how you're going to interact with people in developing this product or whatever you're doing, there's huge benefits there. And I don't even see it as gaps, it's sort of like there's opportunities. And once people are sort of exposed to this in the context that they know, they can really run with it. Did we accidentally lose our moderator?
We lost.
I'm going to take a wild guess, and I think
Kate said this might happen, and so if it did, we are just going to keep rolling through. So, Blake, any other kind of final things?
No.
Okay, cool. Well, then, Janie, you've been in the room both on the delivery side, the training, the coaching. If you had to pick 3 skills, like what would those be? What would the skill gap look like to you?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I've been thinking about this a lot because over the past 3 years, I've given this training and I've taught these concepts dozens and dozens of times. And I think I can boil it down to like 3 things that if you just practice these skills, even not knowing the larger concepts or the larger practices that they pertain to, you'll get great benefits out of it. So I'm going to give you 2 hard skills and 1 soft skill. So the hard skills are, one is called journey mapping. It's basically an end-to-end from beginning to end process flow. It's like, what are the steps to get something done? And then swim lanes below that of pain points, so what goes wrong. And then below that, opportunities, how you can fix those pain points. I find that to be incredibly valuable because it lets people who often are, if you have everyone in the room who's part of the process, they can go, oh, that's why you do this, or that's why you ask me for this. And then the process becomes the bad guy, right? It's not you're asking me for this, it's, oh, you have to do this, that's why you need this. And so I find that to be a really useful tool for visibility and to break down some of those communication silos. The second hard tool is, or hard skill, is KJ analysis. It's basically a bunch of sticky notes, group them together, give those sticky notes a name, and then vote on which ones you want to talk about. That process we use everywhere, all day, every day. We use it for brainstorming. We use it to, in journey mapping, does everybody agree on the steps? Does everybody agree on the pain points? Does everybody agree on the opportunities? Does everyone agree on what we're going to do for lunch? I mean, you can use it for almost anything, and I find it to be incredibly powerful. The third one is actually a soft skill. And I'd say, yeah, KJ analysis, it's for Kiroju, it's a Japanese last name. It's also called affinity analysis.
You will not be quizzed, Shani. It's okay.
Yeah, it's not a quiz. Yeah, sorry. So actually, Jared Spool, easier name to say, has a wonderful article on it. And you've never looked at Jared Spool stuff. He is absolutely brilliant. I've worked with his, with Dana Chisnell and at USDS, and they're amazing designers, but I digress. The third skill is a soft skill, and I would say it's communications. And I don't know if it's kosher, but a plug for a system we love. It's called Humanware. I've had my teams do it. There's also DISC. There's all these other ways of figuring out. But the point is, my staff loved it because it not only helped them professionally, but also personally. They said it was life-changing. But what it does is it lets you understand how you communicate, specifically when you're stressed, understanding how you see the world, and then how you couch terms and concepts, and then understanding how other people do. Most of these break it into like 4 different styles. So if you're communicating in your style, you're missing 75% of everything. And if you learn to break your communications to communicate with the different ways that others are comfortable, you're going to hit ways that they're like, oh, I get what you're saying. So what I found is that that soft skill, that ability to communicate concepts, especially when people are uncomfortable because you're giving them new things, is as important, if not more important, than the actual concepts themselves, because you're coming across as an honest broker where you're like, hey, I'm on your side. We're just trying to get this done.
Yeah. Shani, thanks for this. And what I love about your experience is that you share not just skills or things that people implement on their own, but almost like processes that are helping people better work together and better identify problems in a way that's going to allow them to move forward more quickly. So thanks for sharing. I want to get to kind of designing for this audience, because what we hear a lot from our state partners, and I think Blake, you are the champion for no more Clippy in terms of training content and things like that. But I want to, before we get to designing for this audience and really paying respect and value to the work that's being done through high quality content, I want to, Alexis, kick one question to you, which is just, we'd be remiss not to say it, just so much has changed in terms of the landscape of online learning, how people think about it, how they think that it could have value to them in their life. What do you think about how this, easier adoption of online learning and not having to be in a classroom opens up for initiatives like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, we've made probably more like a decade's worth of progress, and in the unfortunate framing of COVID, in the sense of people being able to exercise like location autonomy, but also like learning autonomy. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting when you look at something like the Great Resignation is that there's always, things that people can point to about that are negative about why people are leaving, but actually the underlying research really shows that there is an actual optimism and a positivity, and interestingly enough, a belief in someone's own value that they can do better, that they can have a different and better experience. And, so whether that is, using the types of tools that, we've talked about today to be curious, but a different maybe, and this isn't, I don't mean to overgeneralize, but maybe more of a sense of like the need to advocate for oneself, right? And the need to be able to navigate. You also see fundamental changes, when someone, for example, you're literally seeing people that used to do one thing going into entirely different trades by learning it on YouTube, right? Or Khan Academy, or fill in the blank. So I think that, as public servants and as people trying to support this, part of what we have to think about is like the required, dictated versus entrepreneurial versions of learning, right? And what that also means is a real opportunity to think about, again, like the why and the story. And I'll give you a practical example. It is probably really useful for more and more public servants to understand and become comfortable with AI, right? And part of that is because we're just overwhelmed with information, right? We're expected to make evidence-driven decisions, and we just can't humanly process. Our processor speed is not right what tech might offer. But what is interesting, right, is that someone who may be practicing with AI or looking at the data, that's a very different skill set, right, than someone who might be asking themselves, how is being able to sort information going to give me a different project outcome, right? A business or mission leader. And so, it's really important, I think, for us to not think about skilling as one size fits all, and to think about almost like, I think about them like freeway on-ramps, right? Like some people are going to be able to get on like the late stage because they're super technical and just show me how to code, right? In the AI example. Other people, in the training that I love giving the most, as you know, Kate, is like, what the heck is this? Why does it matter? As a leader, why should I care, and what should I do differently, right? And that's a very different place. So, I think one of the things we can do is be really empathetic to understand what we require and why, but also how we inspire, right? People to take themselves on those journeys, because we're seeing that behavior. And the final thing I'll say, which I always have to level set for myself, is that if you think about how much people adapt every day, so I'm sure for most people here, there's probably an app you've heard about in the last week. You're seeing links to things you didn't know about before, right? You're checking them out. That is a very different human behavior of learning than we expected 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? The formality of this is what you must know and this is how you must learn it. So I think recognizing people have the ability when they're inspired, when they're curious, to take in, to adapt, and to process an enormous amount of information, but being really intentional about like, what are those journeys, to Shani's point, that we're, that we're encouraging them to take.
Completely. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. Not just the transition to online, but so many different ways in the way we learn. And thanks for sharing. Blake, I'm going to kick it to you for the next question. So something that we hear a lot about is designing for this audience, and how exciting and kind of helpful it is for folks to actually hear from someone who's implemented who's done a project on human-centered design and seen the outcomes from it and talked about how they got buy-in for it, and can talk about kind of at each stage of the process what that looked like. I want to hear from you and just hear really kind of breaking down when you think about designing for an audience of public sector workers, how do you think that that's different from maybe private sector or a different industry? Or what are you seeing in terms of what's important to really know and understand as you're creating and building that experience?
Yeah, I think particularly for data style classes or things focusing on data content, I mean, the biggest one is what people have already said, is sort of that personalized context of trying to get the context right of which the people work in. So, it's like remember like 5 years ago, Spotify would report the top listed track of 2016. It was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then suddenly they came out, it's like, Blake, here's your story from 2021. And you really listened to this Backstreet song really way too much, right? This is embarrassing. I just wanted to, right? And so it was like, oh, this hit in a different way. And I can like do more with this information. That same type of layering, we got an enormous amount of, sorry about the technical difficulties.
Yeah, we're hanging on to every word. It's good. Go
I
ahead.
know. It's just this is part of the thing is, buy a good headset, and then everything else just flows from there. In San Francisco and Data Academy, enormous amount of mileage of thinking about what is the type of data that we're going to train these tools on to sort of like people to see. So all the private sites like sales data, the KPIs around that, and I mean, people are smart. You can transfer that, but you're adding a secret extra hour that's not recognized of the training, of you having to map that back to your context. And also you're losing an hour of efficiency you don't have by using this as an opportunity to reinforce other things. So instead of, having data around sales and learning all these great sales KPI stuff and thinking, okay, how am I going to, I'm doing case management, I'm building a dashboard around cases and things like that. What if the standard thing is actually building in, okay, let's do some metrics around, how do we look at disparate impact across demographics? Oh, and let's take it to the next level and not look at this in isolation, but look at the interactions. And so not only just having a course, which you should have, on designing equity metrics, but how do we weave this in to everything that we're doing, these sort of like core concepts we want to be training on in data that's going to be familiar, relevant to the individual people. And it doesn't have to be hyper localized. Like nobody was ever like, we did not create new content for every single department that was being taught, right? Just the fact that it's not sales KPI around selling bikes on eBay or whatever the standard thing is, people were, palm slapping the table excited because they could just make that jump a little bit easier, right? And no offense to the private sector, that makes sense for the training. That's like the common data element that just like, of course, that's what you're going to use. You can sell your training widget to much more people, right? But that doesn't work in the public sector. And so really focusing on those core, the context in terms of data, the context, and then sort of, like you said, those stories of how it was applied, and like being honest about, when things fail, right? It's like, oh, here's what happened when we were trying to do it and it didn't go so well. And here's what we learned, right? We often find we get a lot of great response of having sections on when we're trying to teach and do concepts of like, not just the narrow right way it worked, but here's the 3 other mistakes we made along the way. And so you may have been thinking around approaching, this user-centered process around dashboard design this way, but actually we tried that way you're thinking and it did not go well, right? We tried to shortcut the process.
Yeah. I love so many of the things you said, and the table slapping, I completely hear you on, but I just want to kind of highlight that point in terms of taking that extra effort to create content that feels like it's built for them. I mean, it's any audience you're designing for, but I think it's just something that is so important and really goes a long way. I want to hear, Shani, from you just briefly, and then I'm going to go to Alexis, in terms of anything you want to add to what Blake said in terms of to design for this audience, things to be aware of.
We might be getting a little more into the next question, so I'll just briefly say, like, I think one of the key things was figuring out how to work in a stronger sense of using these to build in your problem definition is really key. Because I think in government, a lot of times when you're designing these things, you forget we may not all be aligned on the same definition of problem, because we may not even be all aligned on the same definition of term or outcome or metrics. There were so many great things that Blake hit on. I'm going to stop there, though. I feel like I could go on for 20 minutes.
No. That is a great point in terms of sometimes like integrating in those foundational pieces that sometimes we get to step 3 and then realize that we need to kind of revisit step 1. Alexis, want to hear from you on this topic. You've been, private sector in government. When we're thinking about the government use case, what's important to consider when you're designing content?
I think first of all, knowing the problem is really critical, but also giving space for that problem to be honed. Right? Because sometimes you'll get like the leadership will tell you, this is the problem, you got to fix this, right? Or we've gotten this. And, sometimes when you see a problem, it's like a manifestation of a lot of other issues. So being willing to maybe the points that are raised, be really to dig at that. The other thing is bring evidence. Jamie was in the chat, kind of how you make some of these things work. I would literally sometimes, like when I was the telework exec, I knew the behavior and culture that I was trying to drive. And so I did a survey ahead of time with questions so that I would be armed with the data to go to leadership and convince them with what I needed, right? Another example was when we launched the Innovation Lab, we put out a survey to industry, in essence, to kind of gauge their appetite or their relationship with innovation. And what was really interesting for you all is when we did the test survey, we phrased it in kind of like, what does, the current state or the future state of development look like? But we kind of answered questions in the current state. And then what we found is that when you said, what's innovative now, people were very conservative. When we switched it and we said, in 10 years, what are the types of things our industry or things like that are going to need to do? Their answers, the exact same questions, were entirely different. And what we realized is that if you ask someone to be innovative in this moment, it can feel threatening, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm not there yet, or I don't know that, or what's my relevance? But when you ask them to have a vision beyond, most people can actually really understand where things are going, and they believe that they'll be able to actually make the progression. Right. And so I would take that evidence back and say, look, people know where this is going. This is why we have to have these programs. Right. So thinking about evidence in a really tactical way as an ally to you. And the final one that, Sherry mentioned that I can't emphasize enough is you really have to set a culture where failing is not only expected, but it's celebrated. And I'll give you another example. When we were doing a lot of different innovation kind of programs, we always wanted to go to the Hill and talk about, all these great things, exactly like what worked, right? We didn't want to talk about what didn't work. But what we found is when we started to talk about, here's the success list and here's kind of the kill list, the things we're not going to do anymore, they love that. Because number one, it showed that we were really intentionally thinking about the fact that, that didn't work. We're not going to put public resources onto that. We're going to move those. And it showed a level of stewardship of public dollars and an intentionality that got really rewarded, actually, from a budget, a vision, and a credibility standpoint. So sometimes we think about hiding failure, but actually projecting how we're learning, leading, tweaking, and pivoting is actually a really smart way to get rewarded.
Yeah, so many good points. Thanks for sharing. And I want to also highlight one thing that I really recognize in this group is just when we are putting things out there and seeing how people are responding. I think that this audience is really just savvy buyers of thinking about how they're going to spend their time. I heard that kind of hinted at throughout, but I think in this audience, I don't think I've talked to anyone in state government who's given, 20% of their time to focus on learning. They're doing it in addition to their role. And so they want it to be actionable. They want it to be helpful. They want to know what they're getting out of it. And they want it to help improve their work and their outcomes. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I think we see it often and hear it from you all as well. Go ahead, Alexis.
I don't know if you got to see the chat, but there was a really robust chat about what you're pointing to that I would call time poverty, right? Like time, we have to treat time as an actual asset, right? The same way we treat oil or electricity and things like that. And it's an emotional asset. And so we were having this great conversation in the chat about actually being intentional of how you calculate time poverty, right? And so if you're taking time to ask someone to do a training, are you relieving? What is the equation you're creating? And that could be, what your customer is navigating or citizen is navigating with you. It could be internal process. But I really think that I've been most impressed when I see leaders really be intentional about their time equations, right? About time poverty as a calculus.
Yep. Thanks, Alexis. Okay, I want to go to the last question, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to get 1 or 2 minutes on the topic, and then I'm going to ask folks who are on the session, thanks for joining us, go ahead and type in questions so we can maybe integrate some of the Q&A as we move forward. So Blake, I'm going to go to you. The question is just opportunity ahead, what you're looking forward to, and I know that you've been working with Joy, Chief Data Officer of California, in really identifying scalable approaches to data training for the state. So I wanted to ask you what you're excited about and what opportunities do you see as you're looking to scale statewide?
Enormous opportunities. So this is all sort of a pending legislation, but there's an exciting proposal for our team to grow and combine with some of the amazing people in the chat from the Office of Digital Innovation. And as part of that, there's actually going to be intentional staff dedicated to a training academy. We got to figure out the name, but Cal Academy or something like that to really scale what we're trying to do and approach. And being able to leverage, of course, adapting but modifying, for this new remote context, right? The approaches we took in San Francisco, right? But really making it something new that fits with the state and leveraging opportunities like this partnership to sort of feed in so we don't have to duplicate work that doesn't need to be. And so we're all very excited around that. Hashtag pending legislation. So, but
pending legislation, but super excited about it.
Very excited.
Really excited to see what happens. And feel free to drop anything in the chat that you're willing to share. Alexis, I want to just quickly go to you and ask a question just focused on why is it important to get this infrastructure in place now? I know you talk a lot about how technology is changing so quickly. So just want to get your take there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that the only constant is change, and it's going to happen faster, and we're going to be asked to, navigate more information than ever. So if I was going to point to something, I think what's really exciting is where, almost to Blake's point, where we're seeing informational co-creation, right? So if you think about it, a citizen doesn't wake up and say, today's my law day, today's my transportation day, today's my whatever. And so really, it's about us to be in love with that customer, to meet our citizen or constituent, right? To meet them where they're at and to think about how we can co-weave information. And I'll give you a very practical example that just to help you understand where the tech is specifically on this, because it's a really important ally. But if for those of you, so put a plus in the thing if you've gone to the Home Depot website, right? One of the things I find fascinating is if you go and let's say you want to buy a door hinge, you're seeing this incredible amount of information that's just relevant to all the questions you might want to know. What aisle it's in, how long it's going to take to get to your house. But what I want us to actually think about is almost every piece of data on that comes from a different information flow. Some of it comes from external vendors. Some of it comes from over here. So maybe we have an opportunity, like in informational co-creation, to not think about a one ring that rules them all, right? But this idea of like, what is my relationship with information? What can I put in? You know, what can I take out? And the fact that we can be more dynamic than ever and still be, you know, secure and private. So whether it's the skills training that Blake is talking about and kind of co-creating, sharing, or whether it is even the information flows and serving a constituent, I just think we're at a fundamentally different place. And what we really have to do is ask ourselves, like, what kind of information steward am I, and how am I going to participate with the information I have or I need, like, to make this better?
Yeah, so important. And Shani, I want to go to you. What are you excited about in the next 6 months or a year as it relates to this work?
So I think what I'm most excited about is the opportunity to practice. I think people gain these skills and you learn them and you're like, this is great. You fundamentally instantly know this is a great thing. I'd love to use it. But then the figuring out how to integrate it in your day-to-day, figuring out like, okay, this is the meeting where I can make everybody get out of their chairs, walk to a wall. I have sticky notes and Sharpies and make them start, either virtual or real, start putting them on the wall. That takes a step, and it takes a bit of courage. It takes a bit of thought, but just the ability to practice that and to see where it works or where it doesn't work for your own culture, I think is really important. So I'm really excited about the thought of helping folks, you know, California and beyond, practice these skills, because once they become part of you, then you riff on them, and then you don't even think about it anymore. You just do it.
Thanks, Shani. So good. Yeah, I love that. Don't just tell, help me do. So with 6 minutes left, I want to encourage folks who have joined us. I don't know if you can come off mute, but toss questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I'm going to do two things right now. I'm going to drop in a link. Yes, bring your questions and insights. I'm adding 2 links here. So I just dropped in a form. If you're interested in joining us, continuing the conversation, I don't know if I'm able to save the chat, so I want to make sure we're able to capture your information. So feel free to click there. Also, my email address, I'm sure some of the other folks are willing to toss theirs in as well if you want to engage with them. But yeah, if folks have questions or want to add a point, please drop it in, or come off mute if you can. Go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, I think one thing I would love to know from people, because I'm curious, is, you know, a lot of times for people, like I'm assuming many of us are, where we kind of, you know, wake up and say, like, it could be better, you know, and have that kind of sense of curiosity or things like that. I'd love to kind of take like an emotional pulse check, right? Because sometimes when you're that disruptor, when you're thinking about how things could be different, when that drives you, it actually can be draining, right? And we've had like a tough couple of years, you know, so I would love, like, you know, do people feel like I'm still 10 out of 10, or like, gosh, I'm at 5 out of 10 and I need like a bump or, you know, a refill? Like, you know, how are people holding up? And additionally, what could each other or leadership or others do to kind of help top that up again?
Looking for a 1 through 10, Alexis?
Yep, 1 through 10, bring it. And Lisa asked a question, can local governments get training from Innovate US?
Yeah, so I said we're right now focused on the state level, definitely for the next, I would say, 3 to 6 months, but we'd love to connect and see what may be possible down the line.
There's a lot, if I can just add 2 cents, there's a lot of other organizations. I know Bloomberg is starting to focus, or they have been focusing on a municipal level. So I think there's so many wonderful opportunities for partnership. And what I like about the attitude from everybody here is that, unlike some previous efforts, people aren't going, oh, only me, only me. It's more of a team, because it's such a big space. Everyone's like, hey, let's work on this together. And there is no one right way to do this. It's what fits you. So try them all and keep what you like, and, you know, ignore what doesn't work for you, you know?
Completely. And to Shani's point, Lisa, in terms of that, let's connect and see if there's any way we can connect you with resources that are happening now or be additive to your efforts, to Shani's point as well. Yes. And Alexis is an amazing person to train and lead. She's fantastic, as you can bet. Okay. I'm going to ask Fiona, who is our wonderful support person, if it's possible to be able to share the deck, because there are a couple of pieces of where we're headed that I'd love to have you. I would love to know if you have advice on managing up. I feel like, Alexis, do you want to take this one?
I think everyone here, could take it. So Blake, feel free to jump in, or Shani as well. We've all had to navigate this. Like, you never get to navigate an entire room or leadership of believers, like point blank. It's always hard. So I do think that earlier in the link, I shared a link to a Google Doc, which is just a shared doc across, I think across mainly federal innovation folks, but it was a list of kind of the 40 practical things that they have encouraged leadership or asked leadership to do. Sometimes that's about like serving up a win, right? So what I mean by that is like, this is going to sound very cutthroat. I tend to look at leadership like, and anybody like myself, are they ego motivated or fear motivated? And so when you want to think about a narrative or telling a story, being able to align and say like, hey, you, for example, really want to be about diversity. Well, one form of diversity is by making ourselves permeable to different ideas, different ways of solving, different, skills, and being able to serve up what it is that you're championing, but in a language or reference that leader cares about and has signaled and understands. And as someone who's navigated 4 different presidential administrations, it's actually really interesting how I got to do the same thing and champion the same stuff, but every administration, it was just differently packaged narratively. So don't be afraid to find that, and to also pressure test how a leader has signaled these things are important to them, right? And by giving them options to exercise it, you're actually giving them a chance. You'd be surprised by how many leaders want to be doing the right thing, but no one's practically brought them what that looks like. So, it's a real opportunity.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And thank you to the question. I know we're at time. I want to thank all of our collaborators. So many of them couldn't be here for this panel, but I just want to thank everyone who's been part of the effort, and thank all of our wonderful panelists. I dropped the deck that I went through in the chat, and look forward to hearing and continuing the conversation and getting your feedback. This is an effort that is in service of our partners and open and collaborative, and that's what we're here to do. So we really look forward to hearing from you. And Alexis, you didn't talk too long. It's all good stuff. So thank you so much for joining, everyone.